Great Dark Beyond, Warrior. And the first card we're looking at is Dwarf Planet, which is a 10 mana spell. Fill your board with random 2-cost minions that attack random enemies. This is some hot jank for Warrior. It seems like Warrior has suffered from its own success. We saw some quite control oppressive cards in sets around like Titans, Deep Miner Bran, which accompanied the Bomb Shuffler, which I don't have a copy of. Boom Boss Throgrun. So yeah, we've had some all-star cards in terms of Control Warrior. So it feels like for a little while now, every Warrior card which is supposedly designed for control has just deliberately not been good enough because they don't want to make any control playstyle more oppressive than it already feels like. This isn't to say that, the bomb shuffling deck is insanely good. It has its place, but, it's not an outlier. It's just, it doesn't feel great to have to play against when you don't have a good answer for it. So, yeah, anyway, back to the actual card that we're supposed to be reviewing. Dwarf Planet, filling your board with random 2-cost minions. So, that's regularly going to be 2 3s and 3 2s that then randomly attack enemies on turn 10, probably slamming their heads against much bigger creatures, maybe removing, 2, maybe 3 of them, and the rest just go face and hit for 8 to 10. So in that sense, it's kind of like an indirect Pyroblast, but it's just not good enough. It's just not good enough. Unless it sees some really weird Warrior support in the future. But for now, I think we'll all be leaving Dwarf Planet to the sidelines. Our next card is the Spore Empress Moldara. It's a 6 mana 6/7, and at the start of game, you shuffle 7 Replicating Spores into your deck. The Replicating Spores are a 5 mana spell, which summons a random 5-cost minion, and your future Replicating Spores summon it as well. So the first time you cast Replicating Spore, it's 5 mana to get a random 5-cost minion, and then that locks in whatever 5-cost minion that might be. And then any subsequent Replicating Spores then summon 2 copies, and then 3 copies, and then 4 copies, and so on and so forth. A 5 mana minion can range from... It's Origami Frog, so, you've got a 1/4 there. You've got stuff like, Puppet Master Dorian, 2/6. You've got, 3 3s. So, yeah, there's a fair number of, low rolls here. You'd expect to be seeing something along the 5/5 or the 4/6 kind of stat line. And then, what's the high roll here? Leroy Jenkins. This can as well, of course, it's not limited to just being a warrior or a neutral card either. This could literally be anything from any class. So, yeah, you got stuff like Doomguard. The Rocket Hopper, there you go. There's your high roll. You get Rocket Hopper, and then you get some 10/10 rushes. But realistically, it's going to be someone in a 5/5 that probably doesn't do anything else. It's just going to be raw stats. It's a lot of tempo loss just having a 5-cost spell that randomly summons something, and you're shuffling 7 of those spells into your deck, so there's a decent chance you're going to get it on turn 5, and you'll probably see more than one in your hand before turn 5. So you need to be controlling the board in order for you to be able to spend turn 5 getting the random minion and then kind of gauging from there whether it's worth chasing the other replicating spores or you need to pivot towards something else that your deck needs to be doing in order to fill it out. It's just really weird and random. Maybe there'll be some weird combo in the future, but for the time being, I don't think anything particularly gels with this. So, yeah, if you open it, you're going to have fun with it, or you're going to have to get your 400 dust. So, there you go. Next card, 2 mana, Jettison. Discover a spell and spend 2 armor to discover another. Having 2 armor as a warrior is quite arbitrary. And I think this just fits really well into any kind of control-y package, which lets you double up on discovering spells. Historically, Warrior has quite a good set of control tools in its spells. So let's just have a quick gander at them. Things like Execute, the Gift, which also gains you access to Execute, Shield Block, and Brawl. Probably one of the best gifts out of everyone. Shield Slam, Blade Storm sometimes is really strong. Blast Charge, again, is basically going to be usually treated as an Execute, unless you just so happen to be running the Excavate deck package alongside this. Shield Block, obviously. Bellowing Flames is a really good control tool. Bog standard Brawl. So, yeah, you know, there's a fair number of options. Trial by Fire is going to be, you know, it's later on in the game when you're going to afford to be casting Jettison and then searching for Trial by Fire and then actually casting it on the same turn, but, you know, still totally in the wheelhouse. Getting a Sanitize earlier in the game and then having time to forge it and then do the thing as well. So yeah, basically, there's a lot of options. I think Jettison does fit in quite well. And quite often, you know, you're not upset about losing 2 armor. You can easily replace that probably with one of the spells that you discover. So yeah, I think it's solid, and I think we'll see plenty of Jettison in no particular decks, but yeah, we're going to see it. And then we've got a Hostile Invader. This is a 5 mana 3/5 demon, and it has Battlecry, Spellburst, and Death Rattle. Deal 2 damage to all other minions. We've seen something similar in the past. There is a 4 mana 3/6, which as a Battlecry and as an Enrage, although we don't use the E word anymore, do we? Whirling Combatant. Frenzy, sorry, not Enrage. Frenzy. So, yeah, and Whirling Combatant was totally playable. It fits really nicely in, especially when you're running the types of cards which benefit from self-damage. You got Gromash. You know, Hostile Invader comes down, deals 2 damage to all of the minions, hopefully clears up a couple things on your opponent's side of the board. And then if it sticks around, you can either play Gromash on turn 8 and then, you know, have this trade into something that's just going to kill it to then get the Gromash to get up to 10 attack and swing into face with that, or Spellburst it if, you know, you've still got a decent amount of presence on the board. You don't necessarily need to be thinking too much about big combo potential, though, because this is just a really solid minion which just keeps your opponent's stuff at bay. It's going to clean up some stuff as soon as you play it, and then it's going to deter your opponent from throwing out minions which are going to easily succumb to it as well. Because quite often, you know, you're going to have spells in your hand as a warrior, especially a more control-oriented warrior. So when your opponent tries to fill back up again, you can immediately just cast a spell and deal another 2 damage to all of the minions. Even on the same turn that you play it. If you get the battle cry and the spell burst off, dealing 4 to all of the minions, that's really huge. And you still have your 3/5 body totally intact as well. So I think this also just kind of generically fits in the same way that Jettison does. So yeah, Warrior, it's still got loads of control options, but this is just really flexible, and I think we're going to see a decent amount of this as well. So welcome to Hostile Invader. Next we've got the Unyielding Vindicator. This is a 4 mana 5/4 Draenei, and its battle cry is the next Draenei you play gives your hero its attack for that turn. So Warrior is one of the classes that has some Draenei synergy. You know, you play this on turn 4 and it's a 5/4, which is totally reasonable. And then presumably on turn 5 you then play another Draenei, which is going to have a similar amount of attack, which then lets your hero swing either for a big damage push. So this seems like a decent tempo play, or it helps you clean up, you know, a decent threat on your opponent's board. Swinging with your hero instead of having to use your minions is always quite powerful, and you know that's alongside playing whatever other Draenei that you might have played is. So yeah, we'll keep this in mind as we look at the other Draenei for Warrior, but this seems like a solid baseline to start from in terms of the Draenei package for Warrior. And here's another Draenei, a 4 mana 7/2. This is the Stalwart Avenger. It has immune while attacking, and at the end of each turn, you swap this minion's attack and health. So if you have played this minion on your turns, it's going to be a 7/2, and on your opponent's turns, it's going to be a 2/7. Your opponent's going to feel the need to chip this down as quickly as possible. Every damage that this minion takes reduces the attack that you can then swing with on your turn. I think the immune while attacking makes this a candidate for more of like you know, it's going to be trading with things on the board rather than necessarily just swinging for face. I think it's easy to look at this and just see the 7 and go, ooh, yeah, swing face, but I think if you're going to use this card effectively, you need to be making use of the immune while attacking. This does also fit with the previous card that we just looked at very well, in that if you cast the Stalwart Avenger after Unyielding Vindicator, your hero does immediately get 7 attack, so that is, again, another big damage push for a kind of mid-rangey Draenei package. So, yeah, these marry together quite well. But, you know, we're going to need to see some more Draenei as well to cement this as a theme for a warrior deck. So let's keep going. We've got a 2 mana 2/2 weapon, the Crystalline Great Mace. After your hero attacks, give all Draenei in your hand +2 attack. So this seems to feed really well into that. And you know, a 2 mana 2/2 weapon is quite fair. It's no Fiery War Axe, but you know, that is the high watermark for weapons since the game's infancy. So yeah, and just based on the other 2 Draenei that we've seen, these are both 4-drops. So in theory, you'll have buffed these by +4 attack by the time you're actually playing them. So that's, you know, 4 mana 9/4s, and particularly Stalwart Avenger getting the attack buffs is really good for it. To get it up to an 11/2. Yeah, this all makes sense. So I think it's looking more and more probable here that the Draenei package works. Let's see if there's even more support. We've got a 4 mana spell, Captain's Log. It draws 2 cards, and it costs 1 less for each Draenei you control. So another card draw spell, specifically centered around Draenei. You know, RIP Arcane Intellect. You're going to be hopefully casting this for a 2-mana discount, if not more, and it's just going to keep, you know, make sure you have access to those Draenei, keeping your hand size nice and large, which Warrior always loves to have, especially when Crystalline Great Mace is hand buffing. So yeah, there is a hole here that specifically this card is going to work with. So if Draenei is going to work, Captain's Log is certainly going to be working alongside it. So yeah. And we've got a 5-mana 3/6 legendary Exarch Akama. It's a Draenei. And after this attacks, all other friendly minions can attack again, except for Exarch Akama. So this essentially, when it swings, is giving all your other minions Wind Fury. Crucially, this doesn't have Rush baked into it. I think if it did, that would be actually really oppressive. So yeah, you do need to work to try and force this to gain Rush or immediately attack. So through Fel and Flames is, you know, making a lot of sense to have these two cards combo together. That's a really nice little thing, provided you do already have a board. Warrior generally doesn't really have the sort of token strategies. It's more just solid bodies that a lot of these Draenei have been so far. So just kind of building up, keeping the trades favorable for you so that, you know, you get this big Wind Fury turn and hopefully push for a lot of damage. It's promising. It's somewhat promising. I don't necessarily believe this will be good enough, but we haven't seen all the cards yet, so let's keep going. So, a 3-mana 3/4 Draenei. Expedition Sergeant. Its battle cry is that the next Draenei you play immediately attacks a random enemy. So here's your other card, which is literally designed to be put together with this. So you play Expedition Sergeant on turn 3, and then hopefully you can just coin out Exarch Akama, which will immediately give this the 2 swings, along with whatever other low-cost cards that you've... low-cost minions that you've already summoned. Solid in its own right, but, you know, I can also see this just being, you know, you wait until turn 8 when you can just play them both out of nowhere, having already, you know, built up a board previously again. So, yeah, you know, Warriors got real depth here in terms of the Draenei. In fact, it seems like the only solid archetype that Warrior's been given here, because I'm pretty sure that's the last... Yeah, that's the last Warrior card from the set. So let's just have a quick gloss over the neutral Draenei once more. So we've got a Lunar Trailblazer here, which does, you know, immediately follow up after these 4-mana Warrior Draenei as a 6/4. So, you know, you can be playing this, getting the 6 attack for your hero this turn. It can, you know, be immediately swinging at things, and it sets the cost of a random spell in your hand to this minion's cost. So, maybe Dwarf Planet does have a home after all. It doesn't. It's much more likely that, you know, does Warrior even really have a spell that's so high cost that you'd genuinely consider running this in your Draenei deck? Well, you got Trial by Fire, so it can make that a bit cheaper, but only by 2. So, not convinced. We've also got the Galactic Crusader. 7-mana 3/9 Taunt. Death Threat will get 2 random holy spells that cost 3 less. No. You want something much more, you know, for these Draenei to be making sense for the warrior deck, they need to be more heavily attack, weighted rather than defensive tools. It's really a tempo deck that just wants to push damage and try and swing and win the game quickly. So I don't think that fits. A Draenei which discovers a spell at the start of your next turn. So that, again, kind of gives more depth for discovering some of these control-y warrior tools, and itself is a Draenei, so, it's a 2-mana 2/2. That is, slightly below what you need for a 2-mana card to really shine, so I'm not sure Astrobiologist is good enough to fit into this warrior deck either. This one immediately looks much more promising though. So Crimson Commander, 3-mana 4/3, Battlecry and Death Rattle to give all Draenei in your hand +1/+1. So this marries really well. This goes straight in, no questions, if the Warrior Draenei deck is going to be a thing, because, getting +2/+2 on all your Draenei, this is an earlier drop, so, you've played the Crystalline Great Mace turn 2, you've buffed this to a 6/3. This then gives the rest of your stuff +1/+1 as well. And then, you can, on your 4th turn, then trade this into something to give the extra +1/+1 again. Swing with the weapon again. So all the Draenei in your hand now have +6/+2. So yeah, I can see this being a really strong sort of tempo deck. We've also got another Draenei, which you can use to set up Exarch of Karma, to give it +2 health and rush. So then it immediately attacks. So then it gives all your Draenei Wind Fury. So this fits in really nicely too. I think this is the 2-drop Draenei that you run rather than the Astrobiologist for sure. We've got a little Peewee 2/1 with Divine Shield that has Spellburst to draw a Draenei. So, this potentially does work because you specifically do want to get the Draenei in your hand to start buffing them as quickly as possible. So I think this potentially also fits as a 2-mana card. Having the Divine Shield does make it somewhat sticky as well, especially if you have hand buffed it a little bit. So, yeah, I think Troubled Mechanic also would fit into this warrior deck. Hologram Operator gives you 3 temporary Draenei, so they only stick around for 1 turn in your hand. Doesn't really work, because, a lot of this hand buff stuff, you want to be having it build up for multiple turns rather than just a couple temporary ones that you have to immediately play straight away. So yeah, I think you pass on the Hologram Operator. Ace Wayfinder, gain 2 random bonus effects, and the next Draenei you play gains them as well. This, bonus effects include Rush, so another less reliable way of getting the Exarch of Karma to gain Rush as well. But, 2 random bonus effects. It's hard to gauge. You can get stuff like Elusive and Stealth and Divine Shield, Poisonous, Lifesteal, Taunt. It just seems a bit too inherently random to be reliably playing. And it's fighting with the other 5-mana Draenei. So, I don't think Ace Wayfinder is good enough. I think there's enough better options for these Draenei. Starlight Wanderer also has a hand buff element, although not directly in the hand, but the next Draenei that you play gets +2/+1. So I think this fits as well as a 1-drop. So, I think we've hit basically every mana cost there up to turn 5. as totally reasonable plays for a hand buff Draenei Warrior deck. And then you've also got a lot there that feeds into Velen, Leader of the Exiled. The only thing really holding back Velen is that it's a Death Rattle trigger rather than a Battle Cry trigger. So, you have to spend turn 7 playing a 7/7 with Taunt and hoping that you get the Death Rattle trigger. A lot of classes can sort of circumvent that. But if you've not won the game by the time you've played Velen, I think, or at least you're closing in on winning the game. So I think you can kind of get away with just playing a 7/7 after all the rest of your Draenei are already doing so much. This, is hopefully sat in your hand for a little bit as well, so it might even be, a +1/+1 and a +2, so it'd be like a 10/8 or something like that, which then sort of stacks all these triggers where you get like hand buff elements and stuff coming off of this when it dies. So, yeah, I think, out of all the classes that we've seen so far in terms of Draenei, Velen fits the best into the Warrior deck. Whether it actually makes the cut, though, I'm not 100% convinced. The Death Rattle does hold it back somewhat significantly. So, yeah, I think the Warrior Draenei deck does have legs. So, yeah, I think there's a decent chance of it seeing some play. So, cool. And rejoice, they've kept the control, toolkit at bay and are favouring a more proactive style of warrior, which, we all like, us greedy control players, we do like classic greedy warrior, but it's good to see a variation on the class that lets it play a bit faster. So, yeah, great. Okay, here we have the Death Knight set, and straight away we've got legendary The Eight Hands from Beyond. It's an 8 mana 8/8 beast. You need to have 2 blood runes in order to play this card in your deck, and its battle cry is to destroy both players' decks except the highest 8 cost cards in each. So this is a really interesting and new direction for Death Knight as a whole. Deliberately stacking, 8 or more expensive, powerful cards to then play this and destroy, hopefully, a lot of what makes your opponent's decks tick in order to ruin their, combo potential or whatever. I think it's quite dependent on the types of decks that emerge after the set drops. It's quite an aggro-centered meta. This, has no real place. Destroying everything except the 8 highest cost cards in your opponent's aggro deck is probably meaningless. Versus, if you're against control decks and they haven't, stacked their deck in the same way to help prevent the fallout from you playing this card, means that you can easily sort of destroy their win conditions. It just seems fun to try. I don't necessarily think it's going to be that good, but and especially with this 2 blood rune requirement, it's going to be hard to just slot into whatever Death Knight package you want. In terms of the types of cards that you can run alongside this, you've got quite dependable Soul Stealer, which is a really good control tool. Obsidian Revenants, they're pretty solid. And Hollow Hounds, also a decent control tool. No Munchers, again, another solid control-y tool. And Corpse Explosions. So, the double Blood Rune decks are certainly in the more controlling archetype. So, yeah, these types of decks can certainly afford to have an 8 mana 8/8 when your opponent has an off turn. In terms of the neutral pool that you can afford to be playing alongside this, you've got Yogg-Saron Unleashed, freshly nerfed, but still very impactful, I would say. Of course, Reno Lone Ranger. But we do, have to start bearing in mind as well, these are the types of cards which your opponent is still going to keep as well. So, the 8 Hands from Beyond is by no means something that's going to completely ruin your opponent's day. And, for the types of games that you're going to be playing where you want this to be effective, Warrior, I don't think, is particularly upset when you play this. They get to keep their Deep Miner Bran. They get to keep, like Inventor Boom and the expensive mechs that it wants to play in those decks. It also gets to keep, like Boom Boss Throgrun, and things like this. So, doesn't necessarily disrupt that too much. If they have already shuffled TNT into your deck as well, these are 6 mana cards, so quite often playing the 8 Hands from Beyond isn't going to completely negate, the 3 or 6 or maybe even more TNTs that have been shuffled into your deck. I think what you can look to do is pair this up with the neutral legendary that's also in this set. If I can find him. Kil'jaeden. So, replacing your deck with an Endless Portal of Demons after you've played the 8 Hands from Beyond, which, as we discussed in a prior video, Kil'jaeden does destroy all those bombs, those TNTs, and circumvents, if your opponent's down to 8 cards and you play Kil'jaeden, you're out of that fatigue danger, and your opponent is not, unless they also play Kil'jaeden. But Kil'jaeden on its own seems quite niche, so I think it's unlikely you're going to see many Kil'jaedens just floating around in general to bounce back from being subjected to the 8 Hands from Beyond. So, yeah, I look forward to trying to see if this works. I don't necessarily think it will, but it'll be fun to try. So, kudos to the designers for coming up with a fun, silly thing. Great art too. And the other legendary for Death Knight is the Exarch Maladar. So this is a 6 mana 5/5 Draenei, and its battle cry is that the next card you play this turn costs corpses instead of mana. So Death Knight getting some really good mana cheat here. I think you're very happy playing this on turn 6, having built up a little bit of a stockpile of corpses. It does have the one Unholy Ruin requirement, but I think that's fairly unrestrictive, as we don't really see, decks with 3 rune cost in a single rune type. So as long as you've got some aspect of Unholy in your deck, which most Death Knight decks have nowadays, you can slot in Exarch Maladar for the mana cheat. In terms of the types of cards that you actually want to mana cheat, Stitch Giant, you hopefully already reduced this by a significant margin, and then this can get all the way to 0 much earlier in the game. If this has already hit 0, that's also fine, because, you play Exarch Maladar, you play whatever other card you want to ramp out, and then you can also then just follow it up with Stitch Giants as well. So that could get a huge amount of board presence out of nowhere in an early turn in the game. Turn 6 at the very least. So, yeah, even though it doesn't directly synergize, it still benefits quite greatly. You've also got, again, like Obsidian Revenant. It's just a solid thing that's really hard to get around. Travel Security hasn't really seen a great deal of play yet. It does feel kind of hard to justify only playing a 2/2 with Taunt, even if you do get the random 8-cost minion. So, yeah, maybe Travel Security. Depends whether the Exarch Maladar is going into a deck that's quite, dependent on Death Rattle synergies. So, potentially Travel Security goes in there. Marrow Manipulator. This is a tricky one because, you know, if you're gonna be ramping using the corpses, you're gonna be paying, you know, 6 corpses just to play this, and then you hopefully want to be spending another 5 corpses to get the 10 random damage sent out. So, you know, can your Death Knight deck reliably be getting up to 11 corpses by turn 6? You know, I don't think that's completely unrealistic with cards like Dreadhound Handler, which creates 3 corpses by itself. Also got the Mining Casualties, which summons another, well, which creates another 4 corpses by itself. So those types of cards early in the game to get your fuel going so that Exarch Maladar can cheat out your Marrow Manipulator, I think is not completely out of the question, but, you know, it's a very, very corpse-centric deck. I think you'd probably be seeing Plagued Grain come back in a little bit, which has been sat on the sidelines for a while now. Which, yeah, at least 4 corpses off turn 1. So, yeah, there's good ways of generating the corpses early in the game, and you just have to hold back and not spend them until turn 6. So, I think this could be a plan which comes together and makes for a really good sort of mid-rangey burn deck that just summons too much for your opponent to deal with. I think you probably do want to have the death rattles kind of going into that as well, just because, you know, if your opponent is going to be able to board clear afterwards, you need to be, you know, keeping the threat up. So getting 2 random 3-cost minions or getting the 8-cost minion could actually be, you know, make for a really resilient sort of deck that your opponent just, you know, even if they have the early board clear, just can't recover from. So yeah, I am optimistic about Exarch Maladar. I think it's got a good chance of seeing some decent play. Next, we've got a 1-mana 1/3 Draenei for 1 Unholy Rune. It's the Arcanine Death Speaker. After another friendly minion is reborn, you summon a copy of it. So this, as well as just being a 1-mana 1/3, which, you know, is very playable, as we've seen in Hearthstone's past, 1-mana 1/3s are almost always playable, at the very least. But the added bonus of basically making your opponent hesitant to kill any reborn minions, or just having to prioritize killing this, you know, using their 3 damage removal on turn 1, turn 2 to bin the threat of, you know, you summoning your Dreadhound Handler, rushing into whatever 2-drop your opponent plays, and then you get a second Dreadhound Handler, which again is a really good way to start generating a lot of corpses to feed into Exarch Maladar. So this pairs up, I think, really well with that deck. You've also got similar shenanigans with Brittlebone Buccaneer. So not only is, you know, when you play your reborn minions, when you play your Death Rattle minions, they get reborn, but then when those freshly killed reborn minions die, they then get an extra copy, which also then is a Death Rattle minion. So, yeah. I think this is a more late, you know, mid-game kind of combo, because I don't think you can necessarily afford to be playing Arcanine Death Speaker turn 1, Brittlebone Buccaneer turn 2, and then finally starting to actually put things like Dreadhound Handler onto the board, your Distressed Cavaldier if you're doing the Plague style deck, and just, like, you know, if it's turn 3 by the time you come back around to finally doing something like Chill Fallen Baron. But it is worth noting that, you know, you kind of need to be immediately trading things to make the most out of the Arcanine Death Speaker. So yeah, I still think it's a really solid early game play. Like, if this just turns out to be a 1-mana 1/3 that didn't do anything, I don't think you're particularly upset, just because it means you're fighting for the early board. So yeah, I think we can expect to see quite a bit of this in the future. And we've now got a starship piece. This is Guiding Figure, a 2-mana 3/2, and its spell burst is to trigger a random friendly minion's death rattle. So I think this, again, is like really solid baseline stats to get your starship off the ground. It also means, you're very quickly building the starship, which I think one of the other Death Knight cards cares about. Even if it's just a 2-mana 3/2 that doesn't end up doing anything, I think that's fine. And if you get the spell burst trigger, that's gravy. In terms of cheap spells for Death Knight at the moment, they do have Horn of Winter, which is double frost, so that is kind of putting you in, very particular rune combos. So, yeah, but it is a 0-mana spell, so it can trigger Guiding Figure straight away. The only thing about that is, if you're going to be caring about triggering a random friendly minion's death rattle, turn 1 you needed to have played a 1-mana death rattle card. And does Death Knight really have a 1-mana death rattle card that's particularly impressive? Certainly doesn't in its class, but is there any neutral ones that it would like to do this with? It does help if I spell that right. Miracle Salesman. Getting another snake oil. That's fine. That helps you search your deck for better cards. Death Knight doesn't really do things with the sludges, but, this can certainly come down on the early turns and start doing that. But, 3 mana dealing 4 to the lowest health enemy, like early in the game, it's not super relevant unless there's some kind of aggro deck here, but starships certainly seem to be more geared towards a mid-rangey strategy. So, it's, Adaptive Amalgam, whilst it's a 1-mana death rattle card, isn't really a card you want to be playing turn 1. With the, you don't want to be shuffling a 1-mana 1/2 back into your deck. So, yeah, I think this is certainly pointing towards more of a mid-rangey package. You want to be playing this, on turn 4, turn 5, after you've already got a death rattle on the board, following it up with a spell, and then starting to trigger some of these more, impressive death rattles. Again, to start this sort of corpse train towards the Exarch seems to be the way that the deck is pointing you. So, yeah, we need to see what the other Starship piece stuff does before we can make a full assessment here, but I think it's, a fair starting point. So let's keep going. 6 mana, Blood and Unholy, Airlock Breach. Summon a 5/5 undead with Taunt and give your hero +5 health. Spend 5 corpses to do it again. So this is, quite similar to Vampiric Blood, in that it's quite a greedy, boost your health by a significant margin. One of the weaknesses of Vampiric Blood is that in those control decks, drawing the card actually can sometimes feel like you're pushing yourself just further towards fatigue. But, if we're going to be playing this in, I think these types of cards seem to be pointing towards the 8 Hands from Beyond. You don't care about getting through your deck too quickly and then playing Kill Jaden to just, circumvent having destroyed almost your entire deck. A 5/5 undead with Taunt. As, on turn 6, if you've been greedy, you're probably a bit behind, and a 5/5 undead with Taunt and +5 health isn't going to save you, but if you've built up those 5 corpses and you get to do it twice, 2 5/5s and +10 health, I think that's a much more reasonable way to spend 6 mana. I think the problem is it's directly competing with the Exarch, and the Exarch seems to have quite a lot of synergy going towards it. And, you know, I think you might prefer to just try and, you know, burn down your opponent with a huge tempo swing rather than gearing towards just having, you know, a ridiculous amount of health. Death Knight has certainly been able to, you know, sit back and get away with just ending up with loads and loads of health. And this is another way of further increasing that. Of course, the problem is, I've been talking about this, and you can't play both Vampiric Blood and Airlock Breach in the same deck. So, yeah. You're playing this in favor of Vampiric Blood. So, yeah. I'm honestly not sure. Not sure what to make of Airlock Breach. I think it needs other reasons to play it than just by itself. You know, your opponent in those sort of control games is going to be playing stuff like Nomelia, which just clears this. Yeah, so I'm having a hard time seeing this be super impressive. Maybe you see one copy of it in these, you know, very control-y type Death Knight lists, alongside, you know, the Titan and things like that. But I'm not sold on Airlock Breach personally. Wakener of Souls, 10 mana, Unholy Rune, 8/7, Taunt Reborn, Death Rattle, resurrect a different friendly Death Rattle minion. Wow, I mean, you know, that is a lot of things to have for 10 mana. I think this is really, really pointing you towards the Exarch. Getting to cheat this out in any manner is going to feel really good. Getting the pairing of Reborn and Death Rattle without, you know, having to rely on other cards to do it for you is really strong to resurrect, you know, other Death Rattle minions. So you do want to be deliberately only running the more expensive Death Rattle minions if you are pivoting into the territory where you want to be playing Wakener of Souls. So Obsidian Revenant is an obvious choice for that, because you're just going to, you know, it's going to feel like, you know, Russian dolls. This pops out that. This pops out more Death Rattle 3-cost or less minions. And then when this dies, you get another Obsidian Revenant, which pops out even more. And then, you know, hopefully you've snuck out the 1 mana Alkanai Death Speaker alongside some of that. So just like endless Death Rattles popping Death Rattles popping Death Rattles just seem like a very funny way of you know, having the Exarch Maladar come out. The only caveat to all that is, like I say, you can only run the more expensive Death Rattle minions. So these early corpse generators are going to become a much less appealing prospect. Are you happy if, you know, you were to play Wakener of Souls and it's resurrecting things like Dreadhound Handlers? Maybe the tempo push is just so strong that, you know, just ramping this out early in the game. You've got the Exarch, which is 5 attack. You've got one of these, which is 8 attack. You've maybe snuck out an Stitched Giant as well, so another 8 damage. That might just be enough just to completely ruin your opponent's health total. And, you know, even if they do clear the board, you still get to bring this back. And then you've also got something like Dreadhound Handler. So, yeah, it sounds like it works. It sounds like it still works. So, yeah. I think this is a solid addition. to that deck archetype. So I think we are going to see this sort of rampy Death Rattle package take hold of the meta. And another Starship piece, Soulbound Spire. This is a 3-mana 2/2. Its Death Rattle is to summon a minion with cost equal to this minion's attack up to 10. So this directly slots with the other Starship piece, which is Spellburst to trigger a friendly Death Rattle. So once you've put your Starship together and you cast a spell, the Starship will trigger its own Death Rattle and hopefully have, 10 or more attack. And then you get to bring in an absolutely massive minion. 10 mana minions these days. I mean, we've just seen Awakener of Souls. That's a really good addition, even if it is random. If you do get one of them, you are going to be very happy. 10 mana minions in the neutral pool. Well, Yogg-Saron just got freshly reintroduced to that, so that's really good. And then you've got things like the Giants, Factory Assembly Bot, which is also a really nice one, because that will then, at the end of the turn, you get the 6 attack bot that swings straight away. Deathwing, 12/12. Amplified Elic, that's probably less exciting, especially because, it does only hit enemy minions, and it is a big taunt body, so, Amplified Elic, that's fine. And does... No, so there's no 10 mana minion in the Death Knight class itself. So, yeah, the pool is low and basically has only good things to summon. So, yeah, we are talking about only when you get up to 10. So, earlier in the game, if you've only maybe played like one of each Starship piece, that's going to be like a 5 attack minion. If you do choose to summon your Starship and summon a random 5 cost minion, it's not terrible. Like, yeah, it's just kind of mid-rangey stuff. Are we putting this in alongside other Death Rattle minions to fit into this Exarch package? I think so. I think it makes sense. The other Starship piece, the Guiding Figure, is an opportunity to get some of these other Death Rattles to trigger. It looks like it all fits, minus Airlock Breach. So yeah, this does seem like a really cohesive package, and also not the 8 Hands for Beyond. That's an entirely different deck. But the rest of these cards all seem to slot together really nicely. So yeah, I'm optimistic about seeing the Starship and Soulbound Spire as well. It's worth pointing out that the other neutral ones for the Starship, Arcanite Defense Crystal, which is also a Death Rattle to gain 8 armor, so that helps with some early game resilience. If you're able to play this turn 4 and just get the 6 armor, that's fine, but if you get the Spell Burst off of the other Starship piece and get another 6 armor, that's just going to help you survive whilst you build up your corpse total and get the Exarch down and get that huge board swing. So yeah, I think this all seems to be working really well together. And of course, you want to be running the Arcanite Defense Crystal so that it helps increase your Starship's attack for when you do pull the trigger, and then it's easier to get the higher cost minions from triggering the Death Rattle on your Starship. So yeah, it's looking really good. We've got a 1-mana double Blood Rune spell, Orbital Moon. Give a minion taunt and lifesteal. If you played an adjacent card this turn, also give it Reborn. So you have to play an adjacent card this turn in order to get the bonus. So that is somewhat restrictive. Death Knights in particular tend to be running quite large hand sizes, so this can sort of limit what you play first in order to get the bonus of the Reborn on top of it. Are you happy just giving a minion taunt and lifesteal? I think probably for 1 mana that's fine. I think the main thing that stops this from seeing huge amounts of play is the double Blood Rune. Whilst double Blood is totally fine as a baseline, You can actually run it alongside all these new Death Knight cards. They are all single unholy, so it's just whether the Exarch deck wants to be more in the territory of double unholy as opposed to double blood. I don't think necessarily any cards except Plagued Grain. So Plagued Grain, it's whether this fits better than Orbital Moon, and as we've spoken about, getting the extra corpses as quickly as possible in order to fuel your Exarch is quite important, versus just giving a minion Taunt and Lifesteal and maybe also Reborn. You know, this does mean that you've got another way of getting more Death Rattle triggers on some of these sort of mid-gamey threats that you put out. It's also a decent option to trigger the spell burst on your guiding figure. So, yeah, it's fighting for a place, but it may find it. It may find it. Cheap spells are just generally good. It's literally whether the deck ends up being double unholy or double blood rune. If you're going to be running the plague package alongside these Death Rattle synergy cards, you do ideally want the double unholy as well. Yeah, Distress Cavaldier also double unholy. But, you know, the plagues aren't incredible. People love to run them, but they aren't, you know, the absolutely miserable experience that some people claim they are. So, yeah, maybe Orbital Moon's good enough. It's one where I'll be, you know, equally unsurprised if it does see play or doesn't see play. It's right on the edge. 4 mana, Suffocate. Destroy a minion. If you're building a starship, also destroy a random neighbor. So this is a shadow spell. And you basically, you want to be playing this in the starship deck. I think, you know, a 4 mana destroy 2 minions at that stage in the game is probably just going to be both of your opponent's minions. Or, you know, if you've got 3 minions, it's quite easy to pick the right one so that, you know, you target the left or right minion and then it hits the middle minion. It's only really if they deliberately position it so that the middle minion is the least valuable. But there's a lot of adjacency effects in the game now where it's hard to gauge sometimes whether you need to be putting your most valuable targets in the middle of your board or on the edges of your board. It will just be a case of learning that for Death Knight, you want to put them on the edges of your board. In terms of how it actually plays, so as I've said, I think getting your starship being built before you play this card, you've got both Guiding Figures and you've got both Soulbound Spires and you've probably got both Arcanite Crystals as well. So I think there's going to be quite a few times where on turn 4 you are going to be able to get the bonus on casting this. It's also worth saying that just casting this for 4 and destroying a minion is probably fine if you really need to, but not so good that you're running this in any deck regardless of the starship or not. I think it's totally reasonable, a bit like Orbital Moon, which we just talked about. I think it's right on the edge of whether it sees play or not. Death Knight has tons of removal options, so, you know, you're not necessarily super crazy about having another removal spell. And is it better than all the other potential options? So, you know, things like Death Strike. Would you rather have 6 lifesteal than getting a second minion destroyed? Corpse Explosion, you know, just wipe the entire board versus, you know, keep your board intact and only get 2 of their minions destroyed. So yeah, I think the main thing is just, playing it on turn 4, you've got things like Down with the Ship, Frost Strike, things like this where it's basically just fighting for space, which is quite funny considering it's a Starship card. Yeah, again, it might see play, it might not. 3 mana, Assimilating Blight. It's a 3 rune card, 1 blood, 2 unholy, and you discover a 3-cost Death Rattle minion and summon it with Reborn. So what are the 3-cost Death Rattle minions that you can get from this? Chillfallen Baron, which I think is totally fine. Frostbitten Freebooter, which if you're, not in the frost, you're basically never going to get these 5 damage triggers. It is just going to freeze 3 random enemies, which, yeah, although it does give it Reborn, so yeah, there could potentially be room there where you do actually get to do some 5 damage triggers as well. But yeah, certainly not the most exciting option. And then in terms of the neutral pool, Bucket of Soldiers is going to make you sad. Although, this is a Discover, so yeah, you see Bucket of Soldiers, just ignore it. Clearance Promoter helps you ramp some spells, so that's not a bad one. It'll let you ramp them twice as well, actually, so that's, yeah, it's really going to make your spells cheap as chips. Fate Splitter, it's going to be very conditional. People don't play Fate Splitter because when it's your opponent's turn, they can kind of deliberately skew it so that you don't get the most synergistic card. Floppy Hydra, you don't really want to be mucking around with getting one of them shuffled into your deck, or rather, you'd get 2 shuffled into your deck, so yeah, you don't really want to do that. Gattle Snake, no. just no. High Noon Duelist, potentially, if you're running quite a greedy list with high-cost minions, you might be able to get away with, trying to destroy your opponent's cards, but note that this is not going to go into the 8 Hands from Beyond, because that card's a double Blood Rune card, so you can't be building a deck that's centered around having a really high-cost deck. Iridescent Gyreworm is whatever, I think a lot of these 3-cost minions are pretty whatever. So it's one to keep your eye on for whether there's a lot of good options in the future. From this set, you can get your Soulbound Spire from it, which, if you're the Starship deck, you're pretty damn happy about. But it does restrict you into being specifically this rune combination, which admittedly does, it is the rune combination I've been, saying is where I think the Starship and the Death Rattle stuff is going to be in order to get Plagued Grain. So, yeah, it's another card right on the edge. It's very relevant to get a Death Rattle with Reborn. So, it's certainly going to see some experimentation, but it may ultimately see the cut. It does help generate corpses as well, because, that's at least 2. So, maybe. Not convinced, though. Not convinced. I'd say, yeah, these 3 spells, out of the 3 of them, which one's going to see the most play? If I had to put my money on it, I think Suffocate's the one that sees play. That's Death Knight, another Starship class, so I think I'm going to be very happy if I get to muck around with Exarch Maladar and give that deck a spin. But we shall see in the Great Dark Beyond.